Hey guys, welcome to Kiwi Classics and Customs. Friday afternoon here, we're kind of wrapping up. I just wanted to share a little bit of a story on this El Camino. You guys will have probably seen this before. It's a regular customer of ours, great guy, and a cool old truck. Now the problem he'd been having, two problems really. He was having an issue with overheating. Wasn't boiling over or anything, but it was just reading very hot on the gauge. So we'll get back to that in a moment. The other problem he was having was like an intermittent starting problem. Sometimes he'd hit the key, it would just click. Other times there would just be nobody home, just dead as a doornail. He'd jump it off, it'd be fine. So a little puzzling. There didn't seem to be a consistency to it. Then it kind of started draining or appearing to drain. You know, you'd come out in the morning, nobody home, and he'd jump it, didn't want to jump start. So he said that, better bring it in, we'll address both the issues. So, starting with the starting or the non-starting, kind of looked at a few things, checked the voltage on the battery. Battery was showing 12.6 volts, which is really not bad, but it didn't want to start. So it's like, okay, so we do have voltage at the battery, but it's not getting through where it needs to go. So we had a little look at the cables that were on it, and this is what we found. As you can see, it's the old school kind of bolt together fitting here, getting a little bit corroded. The other end of the cables, this cable was the engine to chassis ground, this cable was battery to engine ground. Now as you can see, they're pretty rusty, and when you look down inside where it's crimped, it's going rusty in there, and a bit of rust and green and just nasty. I think these cables were fitted back sometime in the 70s. So looking at that, I ran the voltmeter across the battery terminals, and that's where I got that 12.6, and it was consistent with the engine running. You get it fired up, you ran it across the battery cables, these old ones, and it was getting 6 volts, 12 volts, 28 volts, 34. It was like bouncing all over the map. So it was trying to, and was getting some funny spikes into the gauge that I was measuring the voltage with, the voltmeter. So it's like, okay, those battery cables have got to go. So I'm going to grab the camera and bring it a bit closer for you. I'll show you what we did. Now, as you may have guessed, I haven't got my trusty sidekick Barry with me today. He's having a bit of R&R, so I kind of have to film myself. So bear with me if the camera work's not as good as Barry's. But anyway, here's the new terminals we put on. These are terminals from Detroit Speed. Nice looking items. You've got 2 little ports here on either side that you can slide your accessory wires into as you need them, instead of stacking them all up onto the main battery cable terminal. So we ran a new ground cable, we ran a nice new fat power cable. That's a 2 gauge, so that's nice and thick, because we do have a high high output, high horsepower starter motor, which, as I'm sure you can appreciate, if you've got a high performance starter motor and you're running it on low performance cables, you're really not getting what you paid for, which was like some serious cranking power. The other thing we did was we added a little ground strap here from the block up to the firewall of the cab. Now that's something that often gets missed, and when you've got a car like this that is a chassis with a body on it type construction, the body's mounted on rubber, and they can not get a good ground sometimes into the cab. Which just, anytime you've got a bad ground, you got problems. So, yeah, battery to block, block to chassis, and block to body. If you've got a unibody, not quite so important. But if you've got a body that's mounted on rubber mounts on a separate chassis, you need 3 ground straps. So we did that, and problem solved. It cranks really hard. Fires up instantly, solve the problem. So that was nice, it's a win. Next issue we had really was this overheating. So let me switch back to the front camera
and we'll talk about that.
Okay, so we had this perplexing overheating problem. It showing hot on the gauges, didn't seem that hot in reality, like leaning into the engine bay. You get a sense of when an engine's really hot, and you can smell it usually too. Like this car was getting up, on the cruising, driving around, it would hit 240 at times, which is hot. Idling in the car park, it was sitting at 220 like all the time, and it would warm up really quick. Another thing that puzzled me was like the electric fans were kicking on in what appeared to be late. They'd be kicking on at like about 195, which was late. And I know the sensor we put in it to trigger them was like a 160, 65 sensor to trip the fans. So it's just stuff wasn't adding up. Now this car's got decoded digital gauges in it. Now I'm a big fan of theirs. It's really high-tech stuff. It's nice. There's a lot of stuff you can do with it. You can program it to tell you when to change your oil, be it on hours or on miles. It'll read your 0 to 60 times and stuff like that. It's really clever. There's a lot of info jammed in there unlike me, but if you're smart enough to actually be able to get into those menus and take full advantage of it. It's really great product. Anyway, I rang Dakota Digital and said, hey, this is the issue we're having. I've got a question mark over the reading on your gauge. I suspect it's reading over hotter than it really is. And they were like, yeah, that's not, likely, but, let's go through, some tests with it. And, okay, this is not a rag on Dakota Digital. Their stuff's good. It's made by humans. There's going to be issues at times. Cut a long story short, it is the sender unit that goes in here was reading over by about 35 degrees. Full credit to the guys at Dakota. They stayed on the phone with me for probably 35 minutes as we went through a bunch of different tests, tried different things, made sure the ohms reading coming out of the sender was matching with the temperature reading on the gauges, and it all was, and it really just came back round in a full circle to the sensor giving the wrong information to the dash. The dash was reading the information it was getting correctly, but the information was wrong. And as a backup test, we just put an old set of gauges, just a water temp gauge sender into the same spot where the Dakota Digital one went in, and lo and behold, it went from 220 to 190, which is right where it should be, idling the thermostats. It's a 185 thermostat. It's going to float around that 190 mark. We also double checked this, put in a little bit of boiling water, and sure enough it was showing like around that 210, 212, which is the boiling point. So we knew this was pretty accurate. Put it in, and sure enough, our Dakota Digital, like immediately they're like, no problem, we'll get a new sender unit coming to you, no charge. There was no questions about when did you buy it, how long ago, who did you buy it off. It was like, sensor's not working, we'll send you a new one. So yeah, this is not supposed to be a ragging on Dakota Digital. Every product has failures, be it a Rolls Royce or whatever, everything will have its failures because it's made by me. But it's, for me, what makes Dakota Digital now stand out is the fact that they spent 35 minutes with me on the phone. They went through everything, and it could have been something I'd done or something, not related to them. But, they stood by their product, they put their hand up and they said, yeah, it looks like it is our issue, and they're sending a new one. And you really can't ask for more than that. Like, products are going to fail, but it's how the manufacturer stands behind them. And they stepped up, man, and they did it, they've done us proud as far as I'm concerned. So I'm going to keep using their product. This is the first failure in many of their dashes. So, I'm happy, customers happy. So there we are. That's the mystery of is it hot or is it not? It was not hot, but it's a cool car. So hey, you guys have a good weekend. I'm going home to have my cold glass of water, maybe not. All right, hey, see you guys. Have a good one.